Adrian, could you sort of take us through how all of this came together?
Well, remember, Zubin, at the very beginning, it was Kevin Durant and James Harden in the offseason who were playing in LA, talked about the idea of playing together, and that's when James Harden told Houston that he wanted to trade, he wanted out. And it took until really the last several days for talks to start escalating. And, Houston did a good job of making it clear they had a price that they wanted, certainly in draft compensation, to be met. And ultimately, the Nets got there by finding a third team, initially Cleveland, who sent one of their first-round picks off so they could pick up Jared Allen and Taurean Prince. That got them another quality first to Houston, and ultimately that helped get it over the finish line. And, I think once Houston found a taker for Karis LeVert, made another deal with Indiana to pick up Victor Oladipo as part of the four-way trade, it was agreed upon yesterday.
How close did the Sixers come to getting Harden?
I mean, ultimately, I think the best player available to the Rockets in the deal was Ben Simmons. If you wanted to look at whether they would keep him or look at his trade value, and I do think that's a part of it for the Rockets, even bringing in Victor Oladipo, is what might his trade value be, because they could move him again before the trade deadline. But, I think ultimately, this deal with Brooklyn got them, the multiple first-round picks and the pick swaps. I think essentially Houston's betting by perhaps the back end of this that the Nets could be a team that's not as good, and those pick swaps would benefit Houston. But ultimately, listen, I always thought it was going to be a little difficult for Philadelphia to get a deal done if things were relatively even. Daryl Morey left the Rockets, went to Philadelphia, and I think owner Tillman Fertitta ultimately, the idea of not only allowing Morey to leave, but then to send him James Harden and to see James Harden have great success with the Sixers and with Daryl Morey, that was going to be something that, all things being equal, I don't know if the Rockets wanted it to play out that way.
Well, now that he's on the move, Woj, with all the protocols and all the different things, and once the deal is finalized, when will we see him in a Nets uniform?
I mean, it's conceivable he could play Saturday, Keyshawn. There's no, the way the protocols are, as long as he's been testing positive and he tests every day, and he's been in this league protocol, once all the players report and pass their physicals, it's conceivable he could suit up on Saturday against Orlando, although part of it depends on the other players, too, in this deal reporting, passing their physicals, and all becoming eligible to play with their new teams.
Well, you and I both know managing those personalities is going to be extremely challenging, especially for a first-year head coach in Steve Nash. With that being said, how important is Mike D'Antoni to this team now?
Yeah, Mike D'Antoni's history, certainly with James Harden specifically, and I know D'Antoni was a big proponent of bringing James Harden in. I think he thought that they would find a way to make it work. He loved coaching James Harden because he knew he'd show up every night to play. He didn't want nights off. He didn't want minute restrictions. And James Harden loves to ball, and he brings that to this Nets team. And certainly there's going to have to be sacrifice among these three. You can't, listen, even with two great players, someone's got to give. But there's no Chris Bosh in this big three, and that's going to be a challenge for the Nets. It's hard to imagine who's going to be the player that's going to take a significant back seat. With three, someone's going to have to. That's just reality. But, listen, I think part of this trade, 2J, and I think you know this, is it's a bit of an insurance policy for the Nets, for Kevin Durant. They want to be able to re-sign him on his next deal. They've seen him return at an all-world level, and he is the focal point of this franchise. He was from the beginning of that free agent score, bringing in he and Kyrie Irving. It was always about getting Kevin Durant. And now, without really knowing what the future holds for Kyrie Irving and them and what his commitment's going to be, whether they can really count on him, I think they have solidified Durant's future by having James Harden, and I think Kyrie Irving is going to have to figure out how he fits into that now.
What is the internal feeling at this given juncture on Kyrie Irving at the Nets?
Well, I think Kyrie is going to have to explain. He's going to have to explain really what's transpired here in the last week. And I think that, listen, ultimately, as much as anything, and you guys know this in professional sports, teams have to be able to count on you. And if there's issues, if there are things that they need to help Kyrie Irving work through, like any organization with a great player, they're going to be there to do that. But ultimately, they've got to know you're seriously that you have seriously committed to this endeavor and this group and this team. Kyrie Irving has to be a leader on this team. He's got to be a leader for good. And I think for the Nets, they have to know that. But listen, bringing James Harden in changes that dynamic. And this is a team now that has 3 MVP level players on it. And I do think that perhaps the organization gained a little leverage now over Kyrie and over his future by landing James Harden.
Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.